Welcome to Serial Killers with Ben Carter. I'm your host, Ben Carter. In the quiet city of Vitebsk, nestled in the northeastern corner of Belarus, a chilling series of murders unfolded in the 1970s and 80s, casting a sinister shadow over the unsuspecting community. The perpetrator, unknown and unseen, was soon to be named one of the most prolific serial killers in the history of the Soviet Union. Gennady Mikhasevich, a man of ordinary appearance and demeanor, was leading a double life that would shock the nation when it came to light. A married man, a respected member of his community, and a committed volunteer in the local search parties looking for the very victims he himself had preyed upon. His life, on the surface, seemed unremarkable, but beneath the facade of normalcy, a monster lurked. Mikhasevich's crimes were not random acts of violence committed in the heat of the moment. They were calculated, deliberate, and chilling in their execution. His victims were young women, often hitchhiking or walking alone, whom he lured with the promise of a safe ride. Once inside his car, they were forced into a nightmare, brutally assaulted before being strangled to death. The terror cast by Mikhasevich extended beyond the act of murder. He was known for leaving his victims' bodies in plain sight, staging them in positions that suggested they were merely sleeping. He took photographs of his victims, a cold and twisted trophy of his heinous acts. Yet, as the body count rose, the authorities remained clueless. The investigation was riddled with missteps and false leads, with 3 innocent men wrongly convicted for Mikhasevich's deeds. It was not until a decade later, when advances in forensic science and a relentless investigative journalist's work, that the true identity of the killer would be revealed. But Mikhasevich was no ordinary criminal, and his capture would not come easily. The man who had been hiding in plain sight, leading search parties for his victims, was as cunning as he was ruthless. As the walls started closing in, he would go to great lengths to maintain his freedom and continue his reign of terror. The tale of Gennady Mikhasevich is a chilling reminder of the depths of human depravity and the ability of evil to hide itself behind a facade of normalcy. The investigation into his crimes would challenge the conventional wisdom of criminal psychology, shake the foundations of the Soviet legal system, and forever alter the way we understand the mind of a serial killer. Mikhasevich's reign of terror unfolded in the small industrial town of Vitebsk, located in the northeastern corner of Belarus. Nestled on the banks of the western Dvina River, Vitebsk's charm belied the horrors that were taking place within its borders. It was the late 1970s and early 1980s, a time when the Soviet Union was nearing its final decade of existence. The social climate was one of uncertainty and repression, with state-controlled media providing little information on the crimes that were happening. Vitebsk, with its population of just under 300,000, was a tight-knit community. Its people, largely working class, spent their days laboring in the town's factories and foundries. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and secrets were hard to keep. Yet Mikhasevich managed to evade detection for years, committing his heinous acts under the very noses of his neighbors, colleagues, and family. The town was dominated by the imposing silhouette of the Vitebsk Regional Executive Committee building, a stark reminder of the omnipresent Soviet authority. The streets were lined with rows of Khrushchevka apartments, modest and uniform, reflecting the austere communist aesthetic. Life was lived in muted shades of gray, punctuated by the occasional burst of color from a flowering tree or a child's bright laughter. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, a predator lurked. Mikhasevich's victims were young women, often factory workers or students, who were just trying to get home after a long day. With public transportation unreliable and hitchhiking a common practice, these women found themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time, their paths tragically intersecting with Mikhasevich's. The murders sent shockwaves through the community, instilling a deep-seated fear, that was compounded by the authorities' inability to apprehend the killer. The mood in the town grew increasingly somber, the collective anxiety palpable. Yet life had to go on. People continued to work, children went to school, and Mikhasevich, the wolf in sheep's clothing, continued to walk among them, his dark secret hidden in plain sight. The first known victim of Mikhasevich was Tamara Petrosian, a 19-year-old factory worker. On the evening of September 3, 1971, she had been returning home from a late shift when she encountered Mikhasevich. The following morning, her body was found, a grim tableau of violence that sent chills through the community. The pattern that would later become hauntingly familiar was already in place. A young woman, traveling alone late at night, a sudden encounter, and a brutal, senseless murder. In the following years, the list of victims grew. There was Lyudmila Kobotova, a 23-year-old nurse who disappeared in 1974, her body found days later in a deserted area, bearing the unmistakable signs of Mikhasevich's handiwork. In 1975, 2 more women fell prey to the killer, 17-year-old student Vera Shishkina and 21-year-old factory worker Irina Petrusenko. Their stories were chillingly similar. Young women, living ordinary lives, their futures cruelly extinguished by a man whose very existence seemed to embody evil. But it was the case of 22-year-old Lyubov Zakharenko in 1976 that marked a turning point. Up until then, the authorities had been dismissive of the growing public fear, blaming the murders on petty criminals or antisocial elements. However, Zakharenko's murder was different. She was the daughter of a high-ranking police official, and her death could not be so easily swept under the carpet. The gruesome details of her murder sent shockwaves of fear and outrage through the community, forcing the authorities to acknowledge the existence of a serial killer operating in Vitebsk. Yet despite the growing fear and the increased police presence, Mikhasevich remained undetected. He continued his reign of terror, preying on young women who crossed his path. Each victim, a tragic reminder of the predator among them. Maria Sidorova, a 20-year-old student in 1977, followed by 22-year-old nurse Nadezhda Kalinovskaya in 1978, and then 18-year-old Elena Reut in 1979. The year 1980 saw 4 more victims. 19-year-old student Tatyana Stalmakova, 21-year-old factory worker Tatyana Petrenko, 23-year-old nurse Nadezhda Kolodkova, and 20-year-old student Irina Laskova. Each murder echoed the others, a grim pattern of violence that held Vitebsk in its icy grip of fear. As the number of victims continued to rise, the town lived in the shadow of this unknown monster, a silent specter that hung over the community, instilling fear and suspicion. Yet, even in the face of such horror, life had to go on. The factories continued to hum, children played in the streets, and Gennady Mikhasevich, the man behind the mask of normalcy, continued his deadly game. As the killings escalated, law enforcement found themselves grappling with a case that was rapidly spiraling out of control. The murders were growing in frequency and brutality, and the authorities were no closer to finding the killer than they were when the first body was discovered. The pressure was mounting, and the public's trust in their ability to handle the situation was waning. In response, the local police department embarked on an extensive manhunt, launching one of the biggest investigations in the history of the Soviet Union. They enlisted the help of the Soviet Ministry of Internal Affairs and the KGB. Investigators began by compiling a database of all men in Vitebsk and the surrounding areas, an ambitious task that involved questioning over 100,000 individuals. Despite the scale of the investigation, progress was slow. The killer was careful, leaving no witnesses and very little physical evidence at the crime scenes. The bodies were usually found in remote locations, weeks or sometimes even months after the murders, making it difficult for the forensic team to collect valuable evidence. Meanwhile, Mikhasevich was growing bolder. His attacks were becoming more audacious, and he seemed to revel in the chaos he was creating. He began leaving the bodies of his victims in more public locations, no longer concerned about hiding his gruesome deeds. These brazen acts of violence served only to heighten the public's fear, and the town of Vitebsk was soon in the grip of a full-blown panic. In an attempt to generate leads, the authorities decided to release a psychological profile of the killer to the public. They described him as a man between the ages of 25 and 50, likely with a history of violence, possibly a loner with a deep-seated hatred of women. This profile, however, only served to fuel the growing paranoia, as it could have applied to thousands of men in the region. But behind the scenes, investigators were starting to make headway. They had begun to notice patterns in the killer's modus operandi, patterns that could potentially lead them to the monster that had been terrorizing their community. The victims were all strangled, and the bodies bore the signs of post-mortem mutilation, a chilling signature that pointed to a single perpetrator. The hunt for Gennady Mikhasevich was far from over. But with every passing day, the net was closing in. As the authorities refined their techniques and honed their focus, the man who had so successfully evaded them was about to find himself in the crosshairs. Early in the investigation, a handful of suspects came to the fore. These were men who, on the surface at least, matched the broad strokes of the psychological profile that had been developed. But as investigators delved deeper, each was subsequently ruled out, either through alibis or lack of evidence. The elusive killer remained at large, the specter of his crimes casting long shadows over the city of Vitebsk. One individual who frequently crossed paths with the investigative team was Gennady Mikhasevich himself. By day, he was a seemingly ordinary truck driver, a member of the local volunteer police force, even assisting in the investigation. But his double life remained hidden, his heinous acts carried out under the cloak of darkness. Psychologists who later analyzed Mikhasevich's behavior saw a classic example of a psychopathic serial killer. He was narcissistic, with a grandiose sense of self-worth, and demonstrated a complete lack of remorse for his crimes. His involvement in the volunteer police force and the investigation was likely a means of exerting control and basking in the thrill of his concealed identity. The pattern of Mikhasevich's killings also started to form a more distinct profile. He targeted young women, often those alone at bus stops. He would offer them a lift, exploiting their fear of the rampant killer and presenting himself as a safe alternative. Once they were in his vehicle, he would drive them to a secluded spot where he would commit his brutal acts. The fact that Mikhasevich was able to commit these crimes so frequently and over such a prolonged period has been attributed to his ability to blend into society. He was married with 2 children, held down a steady job, and was even viewed as an upstanding citizen due to his volunteer work. This facade of normality allowed Mikhasevich to hide in plain sight, an invisible predator lurking within the community. But it was the very patterns that Mikhasevich had instilled in his criminal behavior, the signature that he left on each crime scene, that would eventually lead to his downfall. As the body count grew, so too did the pool of evidence. And it was within this evidence that the seeds of Mikhasevich's capture were sown. Among the growing body of evidence, one of the most crucial breakthroughs came from the tire tracks left at several crime scenes. They were matched to the make and model of the vehicle driven by Mikhasevich, a ZIL 130 truck. This vehicle, ubiquitous among Soviet Union citizens at the time, was not damning evidence on its own, but it began to place Mikhasevich within the vicinity of the murders. As the investigators delved further into the details, they discovered a receipt for a car repair in Mikhasevich's possession, showing that he had changed his vehicle's tires shortly after a murder. This indicated an awareness of the tracks he left behind, and more importantly, a concerted effort to eliminate them. Witness testimonies also began to form a damning picture. Multiple witnesses recalled seeing a ZIL 130 truck in the area around the time of the murders. Although none could positively identify the driver, their collective testimonies painted a vivid image of a predator circling its prey. However, it was the advent of DNA analysis that proved the most instrumental in linking Mikhasevich to the crimes. Though in its infancy during the 1980s, forensic scientists were able to extract DNA samples from the crime scenes. Even with the limitations of technology at the time, the evidence was compelling enough to warrant a deeper look into Mikhasevich's activities. In a pivotal moment, Mikhasevich's own words ultimately led to his downfall. During an unrelated lie detector test for his work with the volunteer police force, he was asked if he was the killer. Mikhasevich answered no, but the polygraph indicated deception. This, coupled with the mounting evidence, led investigators to focus their attention more closely on Mikhasevich. As the net tightened around him, Mikhasevich was asked to provide samples for DNA analysis. The results were a match for the samples taken from multiple crime scenes. These findings, together with the tire tracks, the car repair receipt, and the witness testimonies, formed an irrefutable chain of evidence. The man who had hidden in plain sight, who had reveled in the thrill of his double life, was finally unmasked. Mikhasevich, the trusted truck driver, the volunteer police officer, the husband and father, was identified as the predator that had instilled fear in the hearts of the citizens of Vitebsk for nearly a decade. Arrested in December 1985, the trial of Gennady Mikhasevich commenced. It was a highly publicized event that gripped the nation. The courtroom was packed to capacity with journalists, victims' families, and curious spectators, all eager to witness the proceedings against one of the most notorious serial killers in the country's history. The trial was a mix of horror and disbelief. The evidence was presented meticulously, each piece drawing a chilling image of the man in the dock. The tire tracks, the car repair receipt, the witness testimonies, and the DNA evidence were laid out systematically, an irrefutable chain of facts that linked Mikhasevich to the heinous crimes. Throughout the trial, Mikhasevich maintained a stoic demeanor. His impassive gaze gave no hint of remorse or guilt, as if he was an observer rather than the accused. When asked to plead, he declared his innocence, defying the overwhelming evidence against him. The testimonies of the witnesses were damning. Their vivid recollections of the ZIL 130 truck and its driver, their fear palpable even after years, left indelible marks on the proceedings. Yet, it was the presentation of the DNA evidence that silenced the courtroom. This relatively new science had proven to be the linchpin in the case. The samples from the crime scenes were a match for Mikhasevich, a fact that he could not dispute. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. The public was both horrified and fascinated by the gruesome details unfolding in front of them. The media reported on every twist and turn, feeding the public's appetite for the macabre. The trial of Mikhasevich had become a spectacle, a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind the most ordinary of facades. The verdict, when it came, was unanimous. Gennady Mikhasevich was found guilty of 36 murders. The judge's gavel fell, echoing in the silent courtroom. The sentence was death, to be carried out by firing squad. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, a sense that justice, after a decade of terror, had finally been served. Outside the courthouse, the reaction was mixed. There was relief, certainly, but also a lingering fear, a sense of unease. The trusted truck driver, the volunteer police officer, the husband and father, had been a ruthless killer. Mikhasevich's trial had revealed this harsh reality, shattering the notion of safety in their small community. With the trial concluded, the question that lingered was why? What drove this seemingly ordinary man to commit such monstrous acts? The answer may lie in the complex labyrinth of Mikhasevich's own mind. Psychologists who evaluated Mikhasevich described him as a psychopath, a personality disorder characterized by persistent antisocial behavior, impaired empathy, and bold, disinhibited, and egotistical traits. They hypothesized that his murders were driven by a need for control and dominance, a gratification derived from the complete power he held over his victims. This aligns with what we know of his modus operandi: the meticulous planning, the calculated execution, the lack of remorse, all hallmarks of a psychopath. Mikhasevich's upbringing, too, may have played a role in shaping his psyche. Raised in a restrictive environment where arbitrary rules were enforced without reason, he grew up resenting authority and developed a skewed sense of justice. His employment as a truck driver only heightened his sense of isolation, providing him with ample opportunities to act on his dark fantasies without arousing suspicion. But perhaps most telling was Mikhasevich's relationship with women. He was known to have had a troubled marriage, and many of his victims resembled his wife physically. Some experts believe that his crimes were a perverse way of exercising control over his wife, an outlet for his anger and frustration. However, it's important to remember that these are merely hypotheses, attempts to make sense of the senseless. The human mind is a complex entity, the inner workings of which we only partially understand. The motivations that drive a person to commit such horrifying acts can often remain shrouded in mystery. What we do know is that Mikhasevich's actions left a trail of devastation in their wake. Families torn apart, a community living in fear, and countless lives forever altered. The repercussions of his actions extended far beyond the courtroom, a grim reminder of the human capacity for evil. In the end, Gennady Mikhasevich was not just a murderer. He was a man who took pleasure in the suffering of others, a man who reveled in the terror he instilled, a man whose actions revealed a chilling disregard for human life. A psychopath, hiding behind the mask of an ordinary man. It is a sobering thought, a reminder that monsters do not always lurk in the shadows. Sometimes they walk among us. In the aftermath of Mikhasevich's capture and the closure of his case, a sense of relief washed over the community, but it was tinged with a profound sense of loss. The wounds inflicted were deep and slow to heal. Families mourned the loss of their daughters, sisters, and mothers, and a palpable fear still lingered in the air. The realization that a seemingly ordinary man, a neighbor, could commit such heinous acts was a chilling reminder of the fragility of trust within a community. For the survivors, the end of the trial did not mean the end of their struggle. They were left to grapple with the trauma of their experiences, the memories of their ordeal forever imprinted on their minds. Many found solace in support groups, sharing their pain and their strength with others who had endured similar experiences. Yet despite their resilience, the scars left by Mikhasevich's actions ran deep. The media, too, played an essential role in the aftermath. The case attracted significant attention both locally and globally, throwing a spotlight on the quiet communities of Belarus. The trial was covered extensively, with journalists documenting the shocking details of Mikhasevich's crimes and the devastating impact on his victims and their families. In the years that followed, the case became a touchstone for discussions on criminal psychology, law enforcement methodologies, and the handling of serial murder cases. Mikhasevich's legacy is a grim one. He is a figure of fear and revulsion, a symbol of the darkness that can lie hidden beneath the surface of ordinary life. His story serves as a stark reminder of the depths to which humanity can sink, but also of the strength and resilience of those who survive. It also prompted a reevaluation of law enforcement practices, particularly in relation to serial murder cases. The errors and oversights that allowed Mikhasevich to evade capture for so long led to significant changes in investigative techniques. The lessons learned from this case have since been applied to other investigations, leading to more efficient and effective strategies in the fight against serial killers. While the memory of Mikhasevich's crimes is a painful one, it is also a reminder of the importance of vigilance, empathy, and justice in the face of evil. As the community continues to heal, the legacy of those lost to his crimes lives on in the strength and courage of those left behind, a testament to the human spirit's resilience. And in their memory, a vow is renewed, to ensure that such horrors are never repeated. Yet, as the dust of the Mikhasevich case settled, unsettling questions lingered, casting long shadows over the resolution. How could a man, so seemingly mundane, live a double life for over a decade, deceiving not just his family, but an entire community? What drove him to commit such horrific acts? And perhaps most hauntingly, could there be others like him, lurking undiscovered in the shadows of ordinary life? Mikhasevich presented as a typical man, working as a truck driver, a husband, and a father. This disquieting dichotomy, the apparent ordinariness concealing a monstrous alter ego, is a chilling reminder of the complex nature of human psychology. It forces a re-evaluation of our understanding of evil, shifting it from the realm of the extraordinary into the uncomfortably familiar. Theories abound as to what drove Mikhasevich to his murderous spree. Some suggest that he was simply born different, a psychopath unable to feel empathy or guilt. Others argue that a traumatic childhood may have twisted his psyche, causing him to act out in violent, horrific ways. Yet, these theories remain speculative, the true nature of Mikhasevich's motivations obscured by the enigma of his mind. The implications of the Mikhasevich case are particularly unsettling when one considers the possibility of others like him. The thought that there might be individuals living seemingly ordinary lives while concealing a murderous intent is a chilling one. While strides have been made in forensic psychology and criminal profiling, the detection and prevention of such cases remain a daunting task. Despite these haunting implications and unanswered questions, the Mikhasevich case also serves as a potent reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. The survivors, the families of the victims, and the community at large rallied together in the face of unimaginable horror, their collective strength becoming a beacon of hope amid the darkness. The Mikhasevich case, while deeply tragic, has left an indelible mark on the field of criminal justice and the collective consciousness. It has prompted a reassessment of societal perceptions, a re-evaluation of law enforcement methodologies, and a renewed commitment to justice. As we grapple with the lingering questions and haunting implications, we also bear witness to the enduring strength and resilience of those affected, their stories a testament to the triumph of the human spirit over the most profound darkness. Thanks for listening. This has been Serial Killers with Ben Carter. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge Network on Patreon. Subscribe now.